When we got into Gaza itself, it's basically you step into another dimension. It doesn't seem possible that it's the same planet. It's apocalyptic.
He's not your lawyer, but he's our lawyer.
Dr. Syed, I'm so happy that you're joining me here today. It is an absolute honor and privilege to have an opportunity to speak to you. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Mimi Syed is an emergency room physician here in the United States of America. You completed 2 tours in Gaza.
Yeah, I went in August last year for a month, and then I went again in December and recently got back early January.
So definitely want to get into experience in Gaza specifically. However, I thought it'd be really nice to get to know you a little bit outside of that particular experience. So could you tell us just a little bit about your personal and professional background? Like, where did you grow up? Where's your family from?
Yeah, my parents immigrated here from Pakistan. They were born in India, and I was born in Chicago. I was born and raised there. I trained there, went to med school there, did my residency in Chicago, and then moved out to Washington State, where I took on some administrative hospital duties, as well as I continue to do clinical work and such. And then I do some part-time work at the Army base for veterans and take care of patients there as well.
I did not know that your family's from Pakistan. My family's from Pakistan as well. I actually
Oh,
grew up
cool.
in, yeah, I grew up in Karachi for a couple of years. It's pretty
Oh,
wild.
okay, cool. I only been there once, unfortunately. I haven't been there, and I've never been to India. We don't really have family in either place anymore. So,
Very cool. So where'd you go to undergrad?
University of Illinois at Chicago.
All right. And what if there any particular like childhood experience or family members that influenced you to go into medicine?
No, actually, quite the contrary. I'm a product of the Chicago public school system in the inner city. It's a miracle that I'm here. But there are no doctors in my family. My parents were pretty open to whatever I wanted to do, as long as I was making a decent living and following my passions. But no, I saw my parents go through poverty as new immigrants and just establishing themselves. And I remember seeing my dad when I was 14 years old. I saw my dad suffer through a kidney stone, and he
Oh
was
no.
afraid to go to the hospital because he didn't want to incur debt. And I know we have a big family, so he didn't want to take on that debt. And I just remember seeing him suffering, and a kidney stone's really painful. And he just fought through it. And I just remember feeling like that's not fair. Like my dad works and he pays taxes. He shouldn't have to suffer like that. And so it motivated me to go into medicine to serve the population that really doesn't have a voice, that's underserved. And that's what I did pretty much my whole career. I trained in an underserved area. I worked in Inglewood, Chicago. I trained at the county program, the osteopathic cardio program in Chicago. And now where I work in Washington State is rural, very poor access to healthcare and very sick population. So I just have been doing that my whole life, my whole career. And
So in terms of education, how many years is it from undergrad to becoming officially a doctor?
so it's 12 years. My specialty is emergency, and that's a 4-year program where I trained in. So it was, yeah,
That's wild.
12 years. Yeah.
So you were an emergency room physician, and that's your official title. That's what you do here in the United States of America.
Yes. Yep.
So before heading out to Gaza and that whole situation, what was a day in your life like as an ER physician?
I work in like I said, a rural setting, community medicine. So people are pretty sick. There's a lot of pathology where I work where people will walk in for the first time. They've never seen a doctor in their whole life. So I was dealing with high acuity and sick patients, just basically bread and butter of a community emergency department, which I was trained for. It's nothing different than a community in Chicago, or obviously not as much as the violent crime that I was used to in Chicago with the gunshots and the stabbings and such. Still blunt trauma and things like that that you would get in any community. Very procedure heavy, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Prior to then going to Gaza, did you have any sort of experience working in a war zone or anything of the sort?
Not a war zone per se, but I did do some COVID relief when things were really bad, when everyone was running away from New York. I went to New York and helped, then worked in Manhattan and then in Queens and for 2 years. So I went back and forth and did a lot of COVID relief there, but nothing, overseas, not in a conflict zone. In fact, I never did any disaster relief other than that. So no, I had no experience.
What would make someone that's, a doctor growing up here in the United States of America even decide to travel to a place like Gaza, let alone the circumstances under which you did travel there?
I think like a lot of people that are watching this happen, I was watching it on my phone, live stream, these atrocities, things I'd never seen before, some of the images coming out. The thing that stuck to me the most was how many children I was seeing just over and over again. And I thought in the beginning, I was like, this might just be one journalist or one person on social media posting these children. But I kept seeing it and I kept seeing different children with the same type of injuries. And I'm like, there's no way that this could be just this many children with these type of injuries over and over again. And I'd been seeing it for months already. And I'm like, there's something going on. Obviously, I was watching it very closely, but I felt the need was pretty strong for the skill set that I possess. And seeing that it was mostly children, I have three small children of my own. I kept seeing my children in these children. And I just kept thinking, I can't just sit here and watch it. I can't just sit here from another country and be comfortable and just keep watching this. I have to go. So it wasn't a hard decision for me. And my husband knows me really well. I remember saying to him one day, I just sent him a text and I said, "Hey babe, I gotta talk to you." He's, "I already know what you're gonna say." I said, what am I gonna say? He's like, "You're
No
going to
way.
Gaza, aren't you?" Yeah, he just knew. And same thing the second time around, he said the same. I said, "Babe, I gotta talk to you." He's like, "You're gonna go again, aren't you?" I was like, "Yeah."
Oh my God.
So he just knew, and we'd both been watching all of this, and we were both consumed by it.
Did you receive any special type of training to go into a conflict zone like this where it's not just necessarily the people that you're treating, but your own life and the infrastructure that you'll be operating from within that's at risk and in danger?
So I have been asked this question before in an interview, like, how did you prepare for it? And what we receive when we are signing up for this is we get a WHO kind of rundown. Hey, this is what it's going to be like. They verbally tell you it's a danger zone, it's level red, you can't travel there from the US, that kind of thing, and give you all those warnings. But there is nothing that someone can put into words that actually justifies what you see when you get into Gaza.
And last question pre-Gaza is what is the protocol? So if an American doctor says, just like yourself, hey, I want to go to Gaza and help out, what's the protocol to do that?
Yeah, it's a very strict process, right? So I had been, before I even went, I was trying for months to go. And it was so hard to go. There was not even a fraction, just such a small fraction of EMTs or physicians able to go and cross through, and very specific kinds of physicians. So everybody wasn't allowed in. And then on top of that, you had to pass the security clearance. So everybody's not cleared. And the reasons you're denied are like they're subjective. The Israeli military, the COGAT part of it is basically can deny you for any reason they want. They don't have to give you a reason. Nothing is in writing. But when you get that selection and you can sign up with an organization or an NGO, then there's a process too, because it has to approve you. And then you don't get approved until basically 12 hours before you enter the checkpoint. And I both times went through Kerem Shalom, which is the Israeli checkpoint. And you can be denied after you go through Jordan, go through Amman, and you cross through the King Hussein Bridge into Allenby and then drive to Kerem Shalom. And that whole process is very stressful. You have to basically dehydrate yourself before the day before because you're not allowed to use the bathroom when you're driving to Kerem Shalom.
You
So
can't
it's
even
a,
stop to use the bathroom?
oh, no, you can't stop. There's hell or high water. You can't stop. So when you leave Allenby Bridge, that's your last chance. And then there's a several hour drive to get to Kerem Shalom checkpoint. And then even when you get through Kerem Shalom, after that, until you get to your destination in Gaza, there's no stopping. You cannot stop. You're in a convoy that's of 8 UN cars that's marked UN and it's armored. But you're not allowed to leave and you can't stop. So you have to basically artificially dehydrate yourself the day before. You're not eating or drinking or anything like that. But anyway, you get to that whole process. And if you get approved, then you are allowed to travel to get to that checkpoint.
So you try for months. You're saying 12 hours before you're supposed to leave, you find out, hey, you've been approved, you can go. You go through this entire process, dehydrate yourself, checkpoint after checkpoint, go to the clearance, then you get to Gaza.
So I went to Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis the first time, and I stayed there the entire time
And how long were you there?
for 4 weeks.
And the second time you were at?
So I spent a week at Nasser, and then the rest of the time, 3 weeks, I was at Al-Aqsa.
Day one, you get to Gaza, you wake up. What's it like? What are you seeing? What are you experiencing? What does it smell like? What do you hear?
You wake up at 6 in the morning, you get to your meeting point, get on this bus, and you drive over and you get through the Jordanian side, which is a piece of cake. Then you get to Allenby, and that's when kind of the intimidation, harassment, and all that starts. That stays really military part. They go through your stuff. They can take your phone. They can do things like go through your bag and ask you questions about why you have certain things. And they can even deny you at that point. You're with your convoy, you're with your all the people that you're traveling with, and these are a mix of everybody. This could be physicians, non-healthcare workers, everybody. And then you get through Allenby, and then you drive to Kerem Shalom, which is essentially at the border. That's where Gaza is. That's when you enter. And that's another intimidation kind of process where there's guns pointed at you and you're putting your bags on a conveyor belt. You get out of there, and then if you pass, then they allow you to get onto your convoy and enter Gaza. And when I entered Gaza the first time, at that point you can't take pictures. It's very strict. As soon as you enter into Kerem Shalom, you start hearing munition. And I am from Chicago. I heard gunshots all the time there, but nothing like this. These are like 2,000-pound bombs. These are tanks. This is not something that we're used to hearing, but it's at a frequency and proximity that's very uncomfortable. And that's the first thing I noticed. When we got into Gaza itself, it's basically you step into another dimension because it seems impossible that just a few miles away, there's actual like normal civilization. There's a street and there's cars that are functioning and there's buildings. It doesn't seem possible that it's the same planet. And it's apocalyptic. You get in and it's just rubble. And this was in August. So there was still like maybe a skeleton of a building somewhere far away or something. But when I went back, it was just completely gone. There was nothing left. It was powder. And when we went in, the first time it was daytime in August when I went in, but you have to follow a certain path and there's 8 cars going through, each has a radio. Every so often you have to get a so-called green light from Kogat and they're following you. They know where you are at each time. And they have to tell you at each point, green light, yes, go forward. And you're not obviously you can't get out of the car or anything like that. You're not stopping unless you're told to stop. And mind you, these are not like roads that are paved. These are broken, like completely destroyed rubble. You have to find ways to go through. And the scene is, I can't even put it into words, but there are children walking around without any supervision. I mean, small children. These are not 12-year-olds. These are like 1, 2-year-olds walking around, no adult supervision in the middle of the road. And there's just, it seems like this is not possible. This is like a movie almost, but it's destroyed. Everything is destroyed. 87% of the actual buildings, if they're not completely gone, they have some kind of damage in them. So schools, we saw schools that were completely bombed and destroyed. Every hospital there is either destroyed completely or has bullet holes or some kind of damage to it from munition.
I got these children that you were saying, these little toddler age, 1 year, 2-year-old children that are walking around aimlessly without adult supervision. What happens with them? I mean, you can't stop to care for them. You can't provide them any assistance. So you just drive, you're forced to just drive by them and
Yeah, always. You can't possibly. If you even saw someone, die in front of you, you can't stop. You can't get out of the car. But yeah, these are small children, and usually it's like a slightly older kid, like a 10-year-old taking care of these kids or something. And I have a video of one of these times where we're crossing through, and there's like a small kid, like an 8 or 9-year-old taking care of 3 or 4 small children, like 1, 2, 3-year-old. But it's common.
so you get to the hospital eventually. You said you stayed at the hospital.
Yes, the entire time, both times. We
So,
live inside of the hospital.
so the first day that you get to the hospital, what are the conditions like?
So in August, it's very hot. And the first thing I noticed when we got out of the car is the number of flies everywhere. I have never seen so many flies anywhere. And the reason is because there's sewage. There's sewage everywhere. There is no system, right? There's sewage on the ground. There's sewage inside the hospital. There's sewage everywhere. When I got inside the hospital, I noticed that there were flies in like the where the patient care area was, like the OR. That's not sterile, obviously. And that's the first thing I noticed. And then the second is the smell, the sewage. It's it's pungent, it's strong because it's everywhere. And then on top of that, it's overcrowded. So inside the hospital, people are like on top of each other. And the reason there's people congregating by the hospital is because it's considered the safest place you could be. That theoretically, we all know that's not true, but theoretically, that's the safest place. And that's where most of the foreigners are. So the American doctor is there. Therefore, they have some safety being near the American doctors. And so people come and congregate there, and small children, a lot of children just walking around, again, crowds of them without any parents or anything like that, following anybody around.
So you get into the hospital, I guess you're given an assignment, or is it just triage, help whatever you can help, or help whoever you can help? Like, how do they even, I'm trying to envision this environment, which is really all I think about is pandemonium, chaos, and hellish is actually the word that comes to mind. How do you even start? Like, where do you start?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is pandemonium chaos. That's a perfect way to describe it. The first day I got there, I was jet lagged. I went up, put my stuff away, and I went right down to the ED, the emergency department, and the trauma bays. And it was literally right away. It was right away. There was a mass casualty incident that came in, dozens of children just on the ground dead, and all of them 5, 6, 4, 3 babies, 8-year-old, all came in dead on the ground because there's no cots to put them on. And in these mass casualty incidents, the MCIs that we call them, this would happen several times a day. And each of these incidents have dozens and dozens of patients in them. So I just want to, for your viewers, just explain to them what that means. In the United States and other countries, when we train for mass casualty incidents, especially pediatric ones of children, we're not training for this level. We're not training for this magnitude because no one can, right? You can't possibly train for children coming in dead or severely injured multiple times a day in dozens and dozens. That's just not something that anyone imagines is going to happen. So no one really trains for that. So there is no one that's actually prepared to see what you see when you get there. Because pediatric trauma is hopefully few and far in between to actually say, oh, yeah, I do only pediatric trauma. You might get a school bus that rolls over. You might get a school shooting, unfortunately, in the United States. But it doesn't happen every day, several times a day for 4 weeks straight or for a year straight. That doesn't happen. There's nowhere that happens. But in Gaza, it's normal.
How are you equipped to cater to these children with these severe injuries in terms of painkillers? You're talking about flies everywhere in the OR room. How are you sanitizing the wounds? How are you protecting them from infection? How are you giving them painkillers? How are you addressing the problem, really, the needs of these children that are seem to be victims of mass casualty events often, as you're describing?
Yeah, you just do what you can. So to give you an idea, I had to smuggle something that's a life-saving equipment that's used for airway. It's called a laryngoscope. It's about the size of my palm. There's different sizes for different people, and children specifically have a smaller size. And I was told before I went that we don't have any of these. And that's the first step in saving someone's life, is to protect their airway. And I brought like more than 2 dozen that I wanted to bring with me. They're disposable, and you use them once, throw them away, use them again. I wasn't allowed to bring them. I had to smuggle one adult size and one child size. And I had to hide it in my suitcase because COGAT doesn't allow that to enter. The Israeli military doesn't allow that to enter. And so that one that I had, I used it about 50 times, and I washed it in dirty water because, and it's not meant to be reused, right? It's something that's disposable, but there's barely any equipment there when I went in August. There was no medications. There were very few types of medications that we could use for pain. But something to point out is the temperatures were so high in August. There was no air conditioner or anything like that. So the medications that we had were almost ineffective because of the high temperatures. They were just sitting out in the hot temperatures. And a lot of them were ineffective, because I remember giving medications to a particular boy that I had been seeing, a young boy that had severe facial trauma, and I just couldn't sedate him. I gave him about a horse size of this sedative, of this painkiller, and I couldn't sedate him. And I'm thinking, what is happening? I haven't given this much to a grown man before. And it was because the temperatures were too hot. It was inactive. Those medications were inactive. So those type of things. There was no gauze at some point. We ran out of gauze, sterile gauze. And so surgeries had to stop for 2 days. There were no sterile gowns. When I was there in August, they didn't allow disinfectant agents to like clean hospital floors or equipment or anything like that. No chlorine to clean the water. Sometimes there was no running water in the actual hospital, so we couldn't wash our hands after. Gloves were almost impossible to find. I took a box of my own small gloves and I ran out of those like immediately. And there were days where we were not using any gloves on blood and all sorts of things, or using the same pair of gloves for 100 patients. So I don't know how to describe it, but it was bare minimum. We had bare minimum and we were doing the best we can with whatever we had.
What kind of injuries were you seeing on these children?
So aside from the usual, I don't want to say usual, but yeah, the war casualties that you see, like blunt injury, explosive injuries, burns, lots of burns, the shrapnel injury. There's a particular type of shrapnel that they've seen specifically in Gaza, and that is they're a cube-shaped shrapnel that's made out of tungsten, and it's thrown out in a missile, intense, or in places where people are congregating, and it's very damaging. It basically goes in and tunnels through into the body and can cause devastating injury, especially in small children, because it's so tiny. I can show you pictures, just so tiny, but it goes in, cavitates, and can create like fatal bleeding. That's very difficult to stop. And we saw those day in and day out in children. But the more odd thing, that something that you don't typically see, is we would see every day we had children coming in with single gunshots, either to the head, either to the chest, or multiple, even sometimes coming in dead. But these were children like under 12 years old. And I saw that nearly every day that I was there. I have 18 documented cases of children that came in. You would ask the parent, common practice, we would ask the family, what happened? And they would say, helicopter shot or sniper, drone sniper. They call it zanana. It's a drone that shoots. And we saw that all the time. We saw it every day.
So these children that are coming in with these extremely intense wounds that you're describing, you're saying you can't provide them, forget painkillers. You're saying you don't have gauze, you don't have gloves. So what is happening? They're just writhing in pain. How do we address these needs?
Yeah, we had some medications, right? We had some medications that we could use, but a lot of it is under controlled pain, right? That pain is not controlled. We would give whatever we could. So we got, for example, we had ketamine at the time, and everybody got ketamine for everything, which is actually a good medication, but when it's effective and the temperatures aren't so high. But also that one drug doesn't work for everybody, right? And we didn't have a lot of it. So we were giving them the best that we could. And fortunately, there were some positive stories. We were able to save many kids. I have many cases of children that I was able to help save. And there were times that we could do the surgeries. And a lot of times it's because we brought that surgeon or that specialty with us in our group when we came in as a foreign doctor. But yeah, a lot of them, I remember a day in August when I went, and there was a day when both trauma bays, so these can hold dozens of patients each, they were filled with children and young teens with single shots to the head. They were intubated, where they were on a vent, but there was nothing to do for them. So we were just waiting for them to die. I still remember this day because every single person on a vent had a gunshot to the head. I had never witnessed that in my life. I never thought I would see something like that. I remember a pair of cousins, a 15 and a 16-year-old girls that were in their tents planning wedding ceremonies for another family member. And a quadcopter came and shot each of them in the head. And both of them came to my emergency department. Both of them died within hours after. The same day, another woman came in, early 20s, shot to the head. A child, 12 years old, a boy came in, shot to the head. A 4-year-old came in with a shot to the head. It was all the same day. And we were intubating them. I was doing the best I could, and we were all doing that, and we just had to let them die because there's nothing to do.
There seems to be a lot of discussion from the Israeli side saying that these are essentially collateral, potentially, but it doesn't seem mathematically possible that you're getting such specific headshots to children repeatedly by mistake. That does not seem normal. What is your opinion as far as the deliberate nature of Israel's actions and the injuries that you were seeing?
I don't think that anyone with any amount of integrity, intelligence, logic could sit there and say that this is crossfire. It's just not possible, mathematically not possible. It's cognitive dissonance, denial, refusal to acknowledge. There's no other explanation. I challenge anybody to talk to me about that. But every single one of my colleagues that has gone there has said, yes, we saw children with gunshots to the head. All of us, actually, we didn't even know each other before Gaza. I met them for the first time just a couple of weeks ago when we went to do some advocacy work in DC and the UN in New York City, but we didn't know each other. We have different specialties. We worked in different hospitals at different times of the year. We come from different parts of the world, different parts of the country. We all saw the same thing. It's impossible that it's just crossfire. How does it only hit the head? How does it only hit the chest? And why is it hitting only small children, less than 12? It's just, I don't know. It's hard to believe that is crossfire or that's not on purpose. I don't know what else to say about that.
Yeah, not only that, just the volume of headshots for children that you're talking about. I do think I agree with you. I think it's disingenuous to frame it as some type of collateral crossfire.
Yeah, I've spoken to ex-IDF that have worked, and they give their theories and what they know about it. And I've heard that a lot of these have AI, but then there is a person on the end of it deciding to take the shot or not, which makes it even more sadistic, to be honest. It's either way. Even if you wanted to say it was collateral damage, even if you wanted to say, okay, these are mostly shrapnel injury, they're not gunshots, whatever you wanted to say, the fact is that Gaza is 50% children. And we all know that's a fact, right? That's not like a secret or something or an opinion. It's a fact. We know that. Everybody, even Israeli military admits that. But if you know that, then how can you just indiscriminately just go and bomb and kill just the general population? That's another thought, right? Why is that okay? Any time that I was there, so every single day I lived in the hospital. I told you in August and December, lived in the hospital, saw the ins and outs of the hospital, spoke to everybody there. There was no parts that were off limits to us. We treated everything that walked through the door, day and night, both times, different hospitals, different parts of the year, different phases of the war. Never did I or any of my colleagues witness militants, combatants, Hamas, militants or brigade members? No, never. So to say that we are bombing the hospitals because there's Hamas inside of them or there's terrorists inside of them, where are they? How come we never saw them? And how come we never treated militants off the street or nearby if they were using civilians as shields and all these claims? We should have seen them. We just never did. Now, I'm not saying they weren't there. I'm just saying they weren't where I was. Certainly, they were not where I was.
No, this argument of human shields is, I think, absurd in its premise, right? Because from what we've seen, people on the ground, people that are watching what's happening on the ground, is civilians and women and children are Israeli bomb magnets. So if I was a militant trying to survive, why would I be anywhere near crowds of civil, like just as with common sense? Like, why would I be around the place where they're more than likely to bomb? What's the shield part?
And yeah, exactly. That's a very good point.
And then the response I always get is, oh, it's because they want to die to skew public perspective. And it's deranged, quite frankly, to use that argument. I can understand collateral damage. I think we all can. We can all understand that is a high level threat or a major concern that needs to be addressed. But just the nature of the injuries that you're describing, which are consistent, frankly, with everything that I've been watching on the ground and everybody I know that hasn't turned a blind eye to what's happening in Gaza, uh, on its face, it almost seems malicious to turn around and make an argument to defend just the onslaught that we're seeing on these children. And the saddest part of it is this is a trapped and defenseless civilian population. They don't have a military. I've never seen a Palestinian tank or a Palestinian jet or a Palestinian helicopter. So what's the imminent threat? What's the need to eradicate all of these people when the people that you allegedly are targeting are incapable? So they say, oh, Hamas is trying to commit a genocide in Israel. I'm like, they're incapable. So how can you justify an actual genocide by fear mongering an impossible genocide? Which has just been very difficult to process all around.
Yeah, it's an excuse. 70% of the patients we saw, I calculated mine to be like more like 80 something percent, women and children. 100% of them are civilians, right? And that's the thing I wanted to stress is it should not be controversial to say that we shouldn't shoot children in the head. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be controversial to say that children in Gaza should not be shot and targeted in the head or the chest. And unfortunately, that's a very controversial statement to make in this country.
There is no greater evidence of there being a genocide or indiscriminate bombing of a civilian population than the widely recognized statistic of 70% of the victims being women and children. If 70% of the people you're killing are women and children, that means 100% of the population is being attacked.
Exactly.
It's a statistical
100%.
impossibility to say, again, disingenuous and almost with malice to say that this is targeted attacks on any particular individuals. You come back after August. What are you feeling?
Anger. That's the best way to describe it. Anger, the depression, sadness, guilt. Guilt is actually the most accurate one because I think anybody, any one of us that goes in and then leaves, I guess I should speak for myself, but I to this day hold guilt because I was able to leave that. Here you are working with people there in the trenches and you share that trauma with them because you live in that trauma too, right? Last time I went, it was 400 calories of food a day. So we're sharing that trauma with them. You're experiencing the physical weight loss and all those things too. But at the end of that 4 weeks, you get to say, okay, goodbye. I'm going to go back to my beautiful life and you're going to stay here. And who knows if you'll be alive tomorrow. And I can't describe the amount of guilt that I had and continue to have every single day that I wake up. But yeah, the next feeling would be anger. I have anger.
I'm sure it's traumatizing to come home and hug your little children, knowing that
Oh,
they're
yeah.
children just like yours, walking around aimlessly and wounded.
Oh, it's terrible. It's terrible. I think I remember the first time I came back and one of my kids had a recital, a piano recital, and I went with them. And it was my first kind of social event coming back. And I was like paralyzed with guilt and sadness because I see these little kids. They're so safe and they're healthy and their parents are there and proud of them and they're not scared that their kid is going to die in the next 5 minutes. And they're celebrating something normal kids should celebrate. But the children of Gaza, that's a pipe dream for them, and it shouldn't be.
What is it about the children of Gaza that makes the Western world and media outlets see them differently?
It's complete dehumanization of that population. And a lot of the Israeli military officials have said this. Those are human animals, or they're born terrorists. I think I just heard one of them say that. And it's if you believe that about any child, I can't even describe how evil you are as a person in your core to believe something like that. And I don't care. It's not about religion. It's not about politics. I'm not Arab. I'm none of those things. It doesn't matter to me. The humanity aspect of it matters to me. And if I am a healthcare worker, I'm a physician, I am a mother, I will be a hypocrite if I don't also see the children of Gaza as my own children, as the children in America or in the UK or any other country. You're a complete hypocrite. And I say that to anybody who says, oh, these children are going to grow up to be terrorists or they're human animals or anything atrocious like that. You are a hypocrite and you're evil. There's no other question about it. You're evil.
There a couple of days ago, I think his name is Jesse Waters. I don't know his exact name. He's a Fox News host. And he gets on national television and says, look at the Palestinian reproductive rates. Like every woman has 5 kids, and Israelis only have 2 children. And these people are uneducated. I don't know if you use the word uncivilized or not, but essentially that they're a danger just demographically by virtue of who they are. And I found it shocking for someone to be able to say something so vile and racist as a mainstream media outlet news anchor who is ostensibly lived a life here in the West, like never even had a moment to experience the reality on the ground. And I always find it shocking how easily they just dismiss and they shrug their shoulders at visceral pain and suffering that children are experiencing. As a father of two young children, seeing people so dismissive of children being slaughtered has been an extremely eye-opening experience, right? Because in my opinion, children was a red line across not just human beings, even generally in species, right? Like you don't want to kill
Yeah.
animals, like baby animals. You're like, oh, that's a child. It's a tiny animal. If it's a gator, if it's whatever, like you don't want to attack them. And even strategically, you know, if children are on the table, then it doesn't matter if you're Muslim, Jewish, Arab, white, tall, short. It doesn't matter. That means if you're in the way, you're fair game. So I don't understand the strategic logic behind it. I definitely don't relate to the inhumanity behind that thought process. And hearing what you're describing, unfortunately, just corroborates and reiterates everything that we already know, which it just adds to the shocking nature of the reality. Like, why isn't there a bigger movement from the media and the government to address these concerns? What pushed you to go back? Is it just a culmination of all your feelings? Was it a new opportunity that came or?
Yeah, when I came back the first time, I thought, okay, for sure, I'm not going back. In fact, I told my husband, I said, I'm not going to go back. I'm just going to continue to do advocacy work here. And I was naive. I thought, okay, it's going to be a ceasefire pretty soon. After I leave, it'll be ceasefire. It can't possibly get worse than this. They have to stop. So there's not going to be really an opportunity for me to go back, or it'll get better. I just kept seeing worse and worse. And then when you go there the first time, you make friends, obviously, and very close relationships, almost like
Yeah, you live a
family.
lifetime every day.
Yes, yes. So you continue to have those relationships and know exactly what's happening. You have a pulse on the ground and to just to know what's happening. And you're still living that life. Part of you is still there. And you never really leave Gaza. I always say that. I always leave a part of me there more and more. But I just kept hearing these things. I'm like, what? You still don't have food? Oh, wait, what? There's less food? Oh, there's more bombings? Oh, there's more children dying? And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. And they still needed doctors. And I said, I'll have to go back. It wasn't really a question. It was, I'm going to go back. And I did. And I never thought in my life it could be worse than what I left it in August. It was 10 times worse.
My God. Well, I'm sure you have an ocean of harrowing experiences, but a particular patient or a particular child that stuck with you that you work with and try to help that comes to mind is, I don't want to say haunts you, but it's somebody that lives in your mind.
Yeah, God, there's so many. And they're positive stories too. There's a girl in that I talk about in most of my interviews is Mira. She's a
Yeah, I was
four-year-old
going to
little
ask you about
girl.
Mira.
Yeah, she's a 4-year-old little girl who was eating breakfast in her tent on August 24th, and a quadcopter came and shot her in the head. Her and a few others down in that area, in that vicinity, also in the head. And they came in as part of a mass casualty incident. And in a mass casualty incident, usually the people that have head trauma, who have penetrating head trauma, who have a certain level of neurologic response, they're deemed to be unsalvageable. And you have to do this quick triage, which is part of a mass casualty triage process. And kids like that, or people who came in like that, would usually be unsalvageable. And it was the general agreement that, well, we're not going to save her life. We're going to just let her pass. But I saw her moving. I saw her withdrawing to pain, and I intubated her. I used that laryngoscope that I had smuggled in, and I saved her. I put an airway in her throat, and we had a neurosurgeon at the time that came in our group, and I ran upstairs, 4 flights of stairs, and said, you need to come with me right now. This little girl needs you. And I pulled him down, and he looked at her and said, yeah, let's take her to the OR. And he was able to save her, and she's doing amazing. She's almost like a normal 4-year-old little girl who laughs and plays and smiles and says, I love you, Mimi. And when I went back, I was able to spend time with her and her mom and her dad. And it's, I'm glad I was able to save her, but I still have this underlying anger. That should not have happened. That should not have happened. Nowhere in the world should that have happened. If she was in the US and she came in with a gunshot in her head, I guarantee you the law enforcement of that county would be in my emergency department, up and down, investigating why it happened, who did this to this child, everything. In Gaza, every day this is happening, multiple times a day.
That's a really incredible contrast that if happened to one child here, all of our resources would be dedicated to find out what happened. And it's happening to
Absolutely.
thousands and thousands of children there, and all of our resources are funding it. I mean,
Absolutely.
what an insane contrast.
It's unreal. It's surreal. When I went back in December, I just remember seeing something that I hadn't noticed the first time, and it was there, but I just didn't notice it as much. This time when I went in December, I worked in the pediatric emergency department, and I was able to talk more to the moms and see more children. But I just the stories that I heard and the children that I saw coming in and witnessed kids dying of things like diarrhea that is completely preventable. I remember a 9-month-old child coming in regularly for the past month before I even got there, coming in with diarrhea, chronic diarrhea over and over again. They would treat him, give him hydration through the IV, send him back to the tents, and he would get contaminated water again because that's all there was, high levels of E. coli. And he would come back again and just keep coming back. At some point, a small baby like that only has so much reserve. But he basically had end organ failure and died because of just contaminated water. That's so easy to clean with chlorine, but chlorine is blocked from entering.
What are
Children that
these?
were fed. Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say I've never witnessed this before in my career, but moms feeding their babies, their newborn babies, sugar water because they were too malnourished to produce breast milk, and they also couldn't afford, or there was no availability of formula. And so babies would come in almost dead because they didn't have any milk or any kind of nutrition. But it's not something you ever think you're going to see in modern day or any place. This happened overnight. This poverty, it's not true poverty. It's not poverty from before. This is a man-made, overnight made poverty.
So, what would be the military benefit of depriving a wounded population of simple things like chlorine or pain meds or gauze or clean syringes or these medical devices that seem pretty basic and general? What possible incentive would a foreign government have to deprive the population of Palestine with access to these basic resources?
Cruelty and destruction to destroy and not be allowed to rebuild because they use the argument where it could be used to sell and Hamas could use it and sell it and gain profit from it or it'll get into the wrong hands. Why can't I take these supplies then? Why can't foreign doctors take those supplies? They're also blocked from taking it in. So really, there's no reason. It's other than to be cruel and to deny people of their basic human rights, which is exactly what happens in Gaza.
It's really sad that the one positive story you told me was actually a very harrowing story, right? You have to go into the darkest corner of the world to find the tiniest light you possibly can that a child was targeted and shot in the head and eventually survived. That's a good story. I think that speaks volumes about what you experienced and what you witnessed. Were there other positive elements of Palestinian society or the Palestinian community that you observed in an effort to humanize them a little bit for this Western media that believes that they're all barbaric savages and animals and cruel children worthy of eradication?
Oh gosh, it couldn't be farther from the truth. So the people of Gaza, there's a 98% literacy rate. That's almost unheard of worldwide. So very highly educated population. I'll tell you something ironic. Before I went, I thought, okay, our NGOs make us wear these vests and they have American flags on them. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I was someone in Gaza, I would hate to see me because I have an American flag on my back. I was scared to wear it. But it was the exact opposite. And I'll tell you, every single day I would sit there. So I would sit there in the front of the hospital where we would wait for mass casualties to come in. And this is where the general population walks up and down this driveway. And there would be people, random civilians, just stopping me and saying, thank you. They would see the flag on my vest and say, thank you for coming from America. We know you are not your government.
Wow.
Thank you for leaving your children and your family and your safety and coming here and showing solidarity and sitting with us because it gives us hope. And I heard that the first time and I was in tears. I'm like, how could you say that to me? I would want to strangle me.
Yeah, we're doing this.
Right? We're doing it. Yeah. And but this happened day in and day out every single time I was there, even the second time I was there. And the friendships that I have made, the closeness, and how they will give you the shirt off their back. If they don't have food, they themselves don't have food, and they will give you whatever they have. There was a day, December 24th, it was Christmas Eve, I remember when I was there this last time. And each time that I went, there's usually like a group of children that kind of follow the foreign doctors, and they're really sweet. They're just the children around. There are some of them are orphans, some of them have parents and living in the tents, but they're always following you around. We would take balloons and lollipops and things and pass them out. But this group of children, every day they would greet me in the morning and hello, Dr. Mimi, we love you, and all these things. But one day on December 24th, they prepared an entire spread of food using the aid food that they get.
Oh,
They
you'll
barely
mess me
have
up.
enough for themselves. I
That's so
know.
tough.
Tell me, I was a mess when I saw it, but I have a video of them, and it was about 12 or 13 of them. They were downstairs past this little security door that we had, and they were like, "We have food for you. We're gonna have dinner with you." And they all marched up the stairs, every one of them holding a little dish or something, and brought it into our living quarters, put it on the floor on a spread, and said, "Please eat." And I have a video of it. It's the sweetest thing. There's like spaghetti, olives, anything they could get their hands on. They brought it up, and they were so proud of their efforts that they made this for us. And we're like, thank you. And we sat down, and I felt guilty. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to take their food, but they were so proud of it. And we pretended to eat a little bit with them, but it's just the kindness and just the unconditional kindness that the people of Gaza have. I've never witnessed. And the strength that they have, the faith that they have. If it was me in Gaza, I would be angry all the time. Right? I thought, okay, these people have to be angry. There's no way they're walking around and they're kind. No, it's the opposite. They're the most patient and kind people. They're not angry. And I used to ask them, the people that I would meet, how come you're not angry? I'm angry. I'm angry every single day. I get up angry. How come you're not angry? And they said, anger is not going to get us anywhere. Kindness is the only thing left. Patience is the only thing left. And so it's when I hear people talk like that and undergoing such dire conditions, such unjust conditions, day in and day out, who am I to feel whatever I feel when I come back home? That's where I draw my strength from. It's the people of Gaza.
Yeah, that's such an incredible point that you just made, Dr. Syed, because I've had those exact same thoughts about these people. I would expect Palestinians and large to talk about the Israeli population the way the Israeli population publicly speaks about, not all of them, but just the sheer volume of vitriolic speech I hear about Palestinian people from the Israeli part of the population that supports what's happening. And it's hard to reconcile that how people that come have been raised and brought up in such a dark world end up being the most positive, the most loving. You mentioned not being affiliated with any particular religion. I'm not a religious person myself, and my wife is Christian. My kids are being raised interfaith. But I tell you, man, seeing the faith of the Palestinian people, I feel like was the first time I truly saw faith. I really saw the power of religion in a positive way. Because when you have nothing and nobody in your corner, like faith is everything. And they really live that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I'm the same, not religious. I don't have a religion that I belong to. But it's not even just about that. It's just a faith in general, a faith that things are going to be okay. Or if it's not, then we're still going to be good people because we are responsible for our own actions. And I heard that a lot in Gaza and like you said, not everyone is perfect. Of course, there's going to be people in any population that are not so nice or are bitter or doing something not nice. And I remember a particular day when a father was angry, of course, rightfully so, very angry, and that his child had died and was just kind of bashing or thrashing things around and breaking things. And I remember, and this was in August, one of the locals saying, yeah, he's angry, but he shouldn't break things. he's still responsible for his actions. I'm thinking, yeah, that's a level of patience that I'm not used to,
I don't want it. That's
exactly.
deep.
As parents, we would do anything for our children. And the people of Gaza, they witness and endure the worst conditions that any population could ever endure, and they keep doing it. I just, yeah, there's no words to describe it.
And when did you come back then last time from Gaza?
January 4th, I came back to the US. I left Gaza, and it's a process, right? We left Gaza the last day of December 31st and then crossed into Amman.
And if you don't mind me asking, how do you process all the trauma that you have seen and experienced? How do you carry that? How do you process that? How do you move on from that?
Yeah, I don't think anybody moves on from that. Maybe some people are better at coping than I am, but I think that it's just something that's now changed. It's changed the very fabric of my being, and that's not going to go away. But what I do think is important is continuing advocacy work, and which I do, all the time. And I have no plans of stopping that. I've said it before, till my last breath, I will advocate for the people of Gaza. And I think I draw my strength and my drive from the people of Gaza, the people I met, the people I encountered, the children. But it gives you a new perspective on life too. We kind of stress over things that are so small in this country, just small things, and how much we eat. That's one thing. It's so silly, but I didn't realize how much we consume. And it just puts perspective on a lot of things, and not just food, but just generally speaking, we consume a lot in this country unnecessarily. But I don't think that I am ever going to forget or move on from what I've seen. All I can do is put my energy, my strength towards advocating and continuing to do so for the children.
So I know you mentioned that you went down with a number of doctors to the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and you advocated. Could you just tell us a little bit about the advocacy that you're doing and how healthcare professionals and non-healthcare professionals could be involved in action steps?
Yeah, we went to DC. There's a large group of us that went to DC, and then a group of four of us then went that same week to speak to the UN. And we met with Secretary General Guterres and other UN staff members, and that was a very positive experience, advocating for various things. But medical evacuations are very important right now. There's a process, and I've learned a lot in the last few weeks about the process of medical evacuations. But generally speaking, there's this separating families, and it's a very cruel thing to do. And just to give you an idea, if it's Mira, we just spoke about, her mom sustained an amputation because of an airstrike on her house shortly after I came back. And so now needs medical evacuation herself. She's a patient, and she's a primary caregiver for Mira. But Mira has two other sisters that are also young. And so the medical evacuation would happen for Mira alone and not with mom, because mom is now a patient. And if mom did get approved on her own as a patient, she has to leave the rest of her children behind. And then to top that off, you don't have a guarantee to come back. There's no right of return. And so I can't imagine that as a mother. I'm sure as a father. Can you imagine leaving your children for an indefinite, maybe forever? You may not see them again. You can't go back. I'm not sure I would even say I want that treatment. I don't want that medical care. I'm not going to leave my children behind in these.
And you're handing them off to entities and organizations that are being run by the same countries that are inflicting all this.
A lot of times. And yeah, there's so much cruelty there. And so it puts them in a position that's just not fair. And there's a lot of other things that continue to happen. There's the miscarriage rate for women in Gaza is about 300% after October 7th. It's 300%. That's unheard of. So this is a direct insult to the birth rate.
The miscarriage rate has gone up 300%.
300%. You're 300% likely to have a miscarriage after October 7th if you're a woman in Gaza. That's like, that number doesn't even make sense. But that's a direct insult to the birth rate, right? That happens all the time. The prenatal care is non-existent. So women are miscarrying. And if children are born, a lot of women are going into preterm labor. And I spoke about this at the UN press briefing when we were there in New York City, there were women, countless women that I encountered when I was there that would have preterm labor and have children born with cerebral palsy because of the conditions that they were living in. The residue that comes off from bombs, the heavy metals in the ground, the unclean water, all of those things are putting women in a very unhealthy position. And they go into preterm labor, and now they have a child with a long-term disability for the rest of their life, that sometimes they can even succumb to that illness because there's no care for them there. So this is a direct insult on the birth rate. It's just one of the things that is another level of destruction to the very foundation of Gaza and to the people of Gaza. But to your other point, yes, we are doing advocacy work. It's been very odd for me to walk up and down Capitol Hill and just kind of doing this. This is not something that I've done before, but as a physician and talking to Congress staff and Senate staff, showing them pictures of a child with a bullet in her head. And I'm naive. I thought, oh my God, they're going to be shocked and appalled, and they're going to say, oh, we have to put a stop to this now. They weren't so surprised. And a lot of skepticism, met with a lot of skepticism, whether it's, is this crossfire? Whose bullet is this? What kind of bullet is this? And that kind of.
That sounds insane. I don't even know how to reconcile those are the types of questions and inquiries that are coming out of people, as opposed to, wait, how could this happen? Or let's look into this further. Or do we have any other information? What would you recommend as someone who has seen the reality on the ground that other people, like in community and society, can do to get involved to help change the narrative or avoid, I hate to use the phrase like fatigue, because I feel like this has been going on at this point for so long that people are just, okay, it's happening, because they're not seeing the day-to-day reality of it. How can you wake people up?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's exactly what needs to happen is we need to change the narrative, right? Just like you said, the narrative is that this is a dehumanized population. So it's okay. We can do anything we want. That narrative needs to change. And how do we do that? I think everybody has their role. And some people will do media, some people will do lobbying and advocacy work. I've seen some things like come out of musicians and artists that are beautiful and that are a form of changing the narrative. And everybody has a role. Everybody can do their part, even if it's simply just having a conversation at work about it. And you do have to push your comfort zone a little bit, because all of us, I'm sure you are too, I know I am, we're putting our careers at risk when we speak up about this, because it's an ugly world. But you do have to push yourself a little bit and put yourself at risk. And even if it's to the small extent of just having a conversation in a place that you're not comfortable doing, sometimes it can just change a narrative and change someone's mind. And that's what needs to happen, is people need to change their mind about what's happening, right? In this country, we bury our head in the sand because we don't need to think about it. It's not affecting us directly. All right. We don't need to. Who cares? I remember someone asking me what part of the US Gaza is in when I got back. That's how bad it is. People don't even know where Gaza is. But we need to change how the people of Palestine are seen in the public eye. And Western media is very complicit in making this dehumanization, right? I remember that the little girl Hind being called a woman in Western media when she's 6 years old. And so it's things like that need to change, and telling the stories of the people, sharing those, it's very important, and to continue to do that. And I think the biggest thing is the ceasefire is announced. If it is in fact sustained, and these threats going back and forth, that doesn't happen, the work is not done. And we have to continue to pay attention, because I'll tell you, after that ceasefire was implemented, children were continuing to be shot by snipers all throughout. And civilians were still coming in after military bombs and things like that. So it continues to happen. But also the aid that was promised after the agreement, it wasn't being allowed in. There's fractions of it being allowed in. So that is something we have to continue to amplify. The building material needed, the shelter, the heavy machinery needed to clear the rubble, the fuel that was promised, the tents that were promised, all of that needs to continue to happen. We have to make sure we're holding people accountable. Accountability is about the most important thing I can stress. Accountability needs to happen. We're not going to forget what happened in the last 16 months. I certainly am not. I'm not going to stop saying it. And we can't stop, right? This is, I don't know about you, but I can't just forget that the last 16 months, all of the injustices that happened. But aside from that, keeping the Israeli military accountable after the agreements are made is extremely important. And to continue to look, what are the people of Gaza saying? I continue to talk to my colleagues on the ground, and the medications needed for children, the life-saving medications, are being blocked, deliberately blocked still. after ceasefire. That's not okay. We need to say something about that. So I think collectively we are stronger. And if we're all saying the same thing and we're trying to change the narrative, I think that I know it seems like futile right now because it seems like these changes are so small, but I think we're in a much better place now in terms of narrative than we were right after October 7th.
I agree with you 100%. It's what got me involved, seeing what I was seeing and think, how can I remain silent? And seeing attorneys in my profession and medical doctors speaking out, losing their jobs and getting threatened. The top 10 law firms wrote letters supporting Israel immediately after the incident. And that's when I concluded. I said, look, I'm fortunate enough that I work for myself and I do have the ability to stand up for myself and speak my mind. And obviously there was a lot of pushback, but there's no pushback that would compare to waking up the next morning and seeing another child with a hole in their head or a body being shredded. And you're like, to what end? I have to sleep at night. I
Yeah.
want to be able to look my children in the eyes and say, hey, we didn't stand by. We didn't sit around quiet. And it's more do something, do anything. Don't
Yeah.
remain silent. And which is really the purpose of that inspired the idea that inspired this podcast, that inspired me talking about what's happening in general is I was like, people need to be able to have these discussions, right? And if you don't, like people that you know, you have access to a different circle. People I know have access to a different circle. And if all of us individually speak up, we can get the message out. And which is why I can't even tell you how grateful and thankful I am for your time, for what you have done, for you being here. I I wish I could scream your story at the top of mountains, and I will. I think it's our duty to find people that have this experience, this know-how. And I love the fact that I think you mentioned you didn't even know any Palestinians before this situation. I neither did I.
I was never really close to the understanding the issue. We all know about it because we hear about it
Yeah,
every once
same.
in a while in the news. And I heard about it in October. I'm like, oh, okay, this is the same conflict. It'll be over soon. That's what I thought. Oh, it'll be over soon, just like it was before. But when I just kept seeing it and seeing it months later, I'm like, okay, this is not the same thing. This is not the same thing. And then to understand that most of my tax dollars are going to this, that made me like, oh, wait a minute,
It's
something's
nauseating.
up here. Yeah, and I wanted to tell you too. It's funny that you have a podcast now, but on TikTok. So I started using TikTok after COVID. I don't know if a lot of people did, but I'm not that big on social media. But I started using it. But when this started, this after October 7th, I was starting to pay attention, and your account was one of the first ones that actually came up, and I was watching because my husband's a lawyer too, and I remember thinking, gosh, he's a lawyer, he's got something to say, he's probably smart, and I was watching it, and you had some amazing things to say, and that's inspired me to do more and speak more. So
That's
thank you.
unreal. That's even if I had never got any other feedback, that alone is mind blowing. And I really appreciate you saying that. And I can't even tell you, my wife, my friends, I was like, I'm gonna get to talk to a doctor that's on the ground. They're like, can we please shake our hand? Can we please say thank you? And I have messages that I'd written out that I wanted to share with you, and I will definitely send them over to you. Let me ask you one last question before we wrap this up. And my last question is, if you had an opportunity to speak to the people to Gaza directly today, what, if anything, would you say to them?
I would say that me and many people in this world are still with you. We're not going to forget, and we're not going to give up, and don't lose hope, because I'm pretty stubborn, and I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep speaking, and I'm going to keep advocating for the people of Gaza.
Dr. Syed, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really, truly appreciate it. Thank you for your
Thank
time.
you. Thank you so much for having me. Take care.